Hi, welcome aboard. My name is Alf Kongslie. I am one of the Staten Island Pearl Harbor survivors here today to try to enlighten who's ever going to look at this film on some of the things that I seen on 12/7/1941. The purpose of the film is to get this down on record, along with the thousands of other interviews that has taken place over the years about this dreadful day. It's just another account of 12/7/1941. The purpose, once again, is no question about it that it's history, and people later on in years, even though 55 years has passed since the end of World War II, we must keep our forces alert and alive to prevent any drastic happenings again. Our motto for the Pearl Harbor survivors is remember Pearl Harbor, keep America alert. And the last part of that slogan, keep America alert, is what we like to do in schools, in their social studies and so forth, getting young men and women interested in the history of the military forces of the United States. In 1941, there was 25 or so Staten Island fellas and gals on Oahu, either in Pearl Harbor and some of the bases surrounding Pearl Harbor. And today, there was only 7 of us left here on the island. 3 of us, myself, John DeSico, and Carmine Von Frolio, are the only active people that is trying to, once again, remind everyone to keep America alert. This chapter that I belong to, 158, was started by other survivors in 1984. At that time, or even today, there is about 10 to 11,000 survivors in the entire country. At one time, there was over 100,000 Pearl Harbor survivors in existence. I myself enlisted into the United States Navy on 12/4/1939. I stood in the Navy until 11/30/1947. My training was at Newport, Rhode Island. That's my boot training. I went to Newport, Rhode Island, and the main things there was to learn to listen, do what you're told, and don't question any authority. This was drilled into us for reasons that will come about later on. I finished my training in boot camp in February of 1940. From there, they sent me down to Norfolk, Virginia, and I was put aboard a heavy cruiser, the USS Quincy. That was only temporary because the ship that I was originally going to be assigned to, the USS St. Louis, was still at sea, and when she came back from her sea trials, I was going to be transferred to her, and that's exactly what happened. After boarding the St. Louis, we had Atlantic duties in the Atlantic, patrols, neutrality patrols. At that time, there was a lot of unrest in Europe, and the United States Navy was trying to establish bases in some of the Caribbean islands for patrolling the East Coast. So I was fortunate enough, along with the St. Louis, to visit these Caribbean islands, which was very, very new to me, just coming away from civilian life. It was quite an experience. In November of 1940, the ship was transferred to the Pacific coast. At this time, what I was doing was studying for advancement. On December 7, 1941, I was a first-class seaman. Eventually, before I got out of the Navy, I finally made the rank of chief boatswain mate, which I was very proud of. Now, on December the 6th, the ship was at Pearl, coming back for some sea trials, and along with other fellows, we went on Liberty in Honolulu, and then eventually wound up in the Navy Yard in one of the theaters there to finish out the evening. Now, on December the 7th, 1941, it was a routine morning. We were up at 5:30 in the morning. We had our coffee. We getting ready our uniforms either for Liberty or for the duties aboard ship that day, and breakfast. I had a deck detail on that particular day of cleaning up an area deck with about 4 or 5 other fellas in what they call the gidunk stand. Now the gidunk stand is nothing but like an ice cream parlor, and then they had the ship store there and a barber shop. We were having a little problem, all of us getting together, getting this deck cleaned up. So what I did is I walked over to a porthole, and I was looking at the porthole, admiring the ship directly across from me, which was the San Francisco, a heavy cruiser. I was somewhat comparing her with the USS Quincy that I was on. At the same time, over to the area back in here, that ship right there, that where I'm pointing, was the St. Louis, moored alongside the Honolulu, and I was looking out here, and I seen a motor launch somewhere in this area. Now what I would like to do is, before I continue with that part of the discussion, is just take a look at the drawing. Down in here we have an area which shows which is north, south, east, and west. The drawing is not to scale. It is fairly accurate as far as where certain ships were located. The green mass naturally is land mass. The blue is harbor water. The orange here is the Navy Yard. Of course, the Navy Yard extended all the way across the whole southern part of that harbor. Once again, we do have an orange area up in here, and that's Ford Island. The purple on Ford Island represents our airstrips in there. The brown at this point right here, there's 2 brown areas right here. These are dry docks. The Pennsylvania, the USS Pennsylvania, the battleship was in dry dock here, along with 2 cans, 2 destroyers right here. And this floating dry dock here had the shore in it. And as history will show us, that is one of the most spectacular explosions outside of the Arizona that took place at that time. When that ship erupted, it shook the whole bay itself. I myself did not see that ship blow up. The oval areas, which is in white, shows where some of the ships were laying, whether they were tied up to buoys in the slips or in some of these loaches that surrounded the harbor itself. Down in here we have some white areas, which is oil tanks. They call it the oil tank farm. That supplied the oils in these tanks supplied the fleet with their oil. Over here we have battleship, what we call battleship row. That is battleship east. Most of the times the battleships would tie up on this side of the island. On this side of the island is battleship west. In this particular case, the only major ship was right there. That is the Utah. The carriers were at sea. They were not in the harbor at this particular time, and everyone that experienced this day says thank God that they weren't there, because eventually the carriers was the fighting force of the whole fleet until the battleships themselves got repaired. In this particular area way up in here, just that landmass up there, that's what they call Pearl City. At that time, it was just a small community, basically like what we do have here on the island. Today, if you went back to Pearl City, it's a metropolis of quite a size and area. Down in this area here, all in this area here, is what we call the sub-base. I'd just like to mention at this time that although the Japanese did extreme damage to our fleet in Pearl Harbor, they mistakenly did not touch any of the oil farms or the submarine base. And thank God that they left that alone. Because if they destroyed any of these tanks, it's very possible that that oil would have flowed down into the harbor and the whole harbor would have burnt up. Not only that, but any ship that was in the Hawaiian Islands would have to go all the way back to the west coast to refuel. And once again, that was a drastic mistake on their part. Down in here, any ship that either came in or out came through this here channel right here. That channel was dredged out to take any major ship, such as the carrier or the battleships, and it might have been dredged out to a depth of about 50 foot. Once again, the ship that I was on was right there. Now, this ship here, which is the San Francisco, and this ship on the other side of the St. Louis is the cruiser Honolulu, another light cruiser similar to us. When I was looking at that porthole, as I mentioned before, I could see this launch right there. And once again, I was trying to get the fellas interested in completing some of the work that we were going to do that morning before we had the day to ourselves. And as I looked out here, I see all these fellas. There was dozens. This launch here could have carried maybe 90 men. I don't know how many men was in the launch at that time. But the launch was loaded with sailors all dressed up in whites. Either they were going ashore or they were going to church services. Then what happened is that they all started to jump overboard out of the launch. And of course I was trying to describe this to the fellows that were sitting there on the deck, and they thought that I was kidding. Just about that time, General Quarters sounded. General Quarters is a signal for everybody to man their battleship, to man their battle stations. Now, my battle station was on a 5-inch mount, anti-aircraft mount, almost directly above us, 2 decks high. It didn't take long for us, or for me, to get up to that battle station. Everybody scrambled at the same time. When I got up to the boat deck, which is the 2nd deck above where I originally was, a Japanese plane came in this direction, and eventually it flew between the San Francisco and us. And I would say at this time that it was a torpedo plane, but there was no torpedo on it. So she may have expended her torpedo prior to this. And when she was coming down to us, the forward gun of the plane was not shooting. He was just gliding by. And the fellow, the two men that was in this plane, the man in the back was facing the back of his plane, which was facing our ship. I seen this man looking at him, seems like I was looking at him eye to eye. Now, most Pearl Harbor survivors will tell you the same thing, that they could have counted the teeth in some of these flyers. These flyers came in very, very low in all directions and every place, even on the airfields further inland from the harbor itself. And some of them make remarks that if they had a spud or if they had a rock, they could have thrown it at the plane itself. And I'm sure that I could have reached them also with some kind of a missile such as that. Now, everyone that was assigned to my battle station seemed like we all got there at the same time. At this particular time, there was plenty of planes flying around. Some of them were making torpedo runs on the ship, coming right across this way and letting their torpedoes drop approximately in this area here and sending them into the ships at Battleship Row. Our mount, our 5-inch mount, our firing pins for the gun was in little cabinets on the back bulkhead of the mount itself. We didn't have any keys to get at the firing pins, and the mount captain sent someone down to the first lieutenant's office to get the keys. Well, he no sooner got out of the mount or off the mount when the mount captain itself literally tore the hasp or the lock off the cabinet that held the firing pins for our gun. Whether he used some kind of a bar or something, I almost swore that he tore it off with his hands, but that's something that seems almost impossible. In the meantime, around the mount on a St. Louis, we had English pom-poms. They were 40-millimeter cannons, and of course, these were the first guns that was firing, trying to protect the fleet at that time. We had 50 caliber machine guns and 20-millimeter guns and what they call 1.1 guns. All these here guns, or most of them, were on the boat deck where the 5-inch batteries were located. And at that particular time, that was the only guns that the St. Louis was using trying to repel this attack. What happened is that the mount captain was calling down to the magazines for ammunition to send up the shells and the powder for the 5-inch guns. Now what happens here is that this is the first time that we ever called for ammunition while we were in port. At sea, when the mount captain called for any kind of ammunition, that would come up without any problem whatsoever. On this particular day, the fellows in the magazines down below did not want to send any of the shells and powder up because eventually they knew or they felt that all that would have to be put away, which would be time-consuming, and they didn't want that. So they didn't supply us with any of the powder or gun or shells right away. Now, at this particular time, so far we have not used any of the 5-inch guns, at least in our mount. Now what happened is that a string of high elevation bombers come across the Navy Yard and dropped 500-pound bombs down. Now what happened here is that a bomb fell just to the starboard side here of the New Orleans. The next bomb went into the dock where the San Francisco and the New Orleans was tied to. The next bomb dropped between the San Francisco and the St. Louis in that water area, and the next bomb dropped into the pier that the Honolulu was tied up to. Well, when those bombs went off, it literally lifted the ship right out of the water. It seemed like it lifted it 10 feet, but of course that wasn't the case. It might have come up out of the water in a jar of anywhere from 6 inches to a foot. Well, what happened there then is that the people in the magazines down below realized that something was more happening than just another drill. And of course, we got our ammunition at that time, all we wanted. These high-level bombers in here was some of our first targets. Across the way, we could see the San Francisco using their 5-inch guns, trying to knock down some of these planes, and at the same time now, we most likely were picking on the same targets. The targets was, although the planes were there, we had to be careful of how we were shooting. the guns, the 5-inch guns, was of no value for any low-flying planes in that harbor. What would happen is that if we did fire something, it would just go on a low trajectory and, of course, cause problems either on land or to the other ships. Our only targets were the high elevation bombers. We got to be very careful about picking our targets. And of course, the mount itself was rigged in such a way that when the guns were at a high elevation, if they twisted and turned this way, which they were allowed to do, that they wouldn't shoot any of the masses or funnels off the ship itself. It would lock itself out where the guns wouldn't fire. So we now what happened is that as quickly as that attack started, there was a lull. There was all kinds of empty casings around the 5-inch mount, so we went out during this lull and cleaned out all those casings, threw them over the side so that if we were hit, that wouldn't be a missile that possibly could hurt someone or cause any other damage. As quickly as the lull came, the second wave or the second attack started. So once again we got back, picking our targets with the same problems of not being able to fire the guns because of lockouts. But once again, the small caliber anti-aircraft guns on the St. Louis was expending round after round, and they were doing a good job. Now, around 9:30, the St. Louis started to well, prior to 9:30, the St. Louis started to make preparations to get underway. What we did is at 9:30, the skipper backed the ship down into the channel here without any tugs. The St. Louis was about 600 foot long, so she had to get way back into this area here, and the captain didn't know if he was going to bring the ship around the island that way or bring it down this way. He decided this would be the best approach to the channel, to the open sea. Most of these ships here were afire. There was all kinds of sailors and everything else with small boats trying to rescue them in this particular area. And the skipper, as history says, he was afraid that he was going to back down on these sailors. Well, the St. Louis started out of the harbor, and I might mention at this point, that was the only major ship that was capable or able to get out of the harbor. When we got down almost clear of the landmass here, but still in the channel, over to the starboard side of the ship, on that side of the ship, there was a midget submarine there. They fired 2 torpedoes at the St. Louis. God was with us. As the torpedoes came to the ship, it hit the coral reefing, and both of them blew up before it reached the ship.
Thank goodness that happened. And so because of that, 50 years down the road, you're here to share these wonderful stories with us.
That's very true.
Alf, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful.